MyGov has not been offline. It simply suffered from a distributed denial of service attack this morning, and currently it's processing 55,000 concurrent users, which means the 55,001st user will not be able to access it.
I probably should have waited for the investigation before jumping the gun and believing the warnings. I didn't think I'd have to prepare for 100,000 concurrent users. Again, my bad not realising that the sheer scale of the decision on Sunday night by the national leaders that literally saw hundreds and hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million people unemployed overnight.
James, my bad. On the stuff-up scale, how did this Stuart Robert effort rank?
Well, on one hand, you don't build a dole office capacity for a once-in-a-100-year economic collapse and expect it to deal with it in 2 days. Like, we're not building that sort of stress into the system, right? On the other hand, when you've got a guy who's, let's be honest, in Canberra is pretty much regarded as a clown, in charge of what is the most critical interface between the public and the government, this is what you get. I mean, he's been a shocker on the whole robo-debt thing. He's a mate of the Prime Minister's. He probably put him there thinking he couldn't do too much harm. Everybody inside the government, more or less, for a year, you couldn't get any odds on him that he'd be the first to go. And then Angus Taylor, you know, was sort of neck and neck with him for a while. But my money was always on Stewie. I always thought he was the pony to back, and he's really come home this week.
Yeah, look, Lenore, this is more than just a little stuff up and distraction. There, you know, as I say, hundreds of thousands of Australians who found themselves in despair this week when they lost their jobs. Look, I don't know how websites, whether they can easily accommodate that sort of traffic or not, but the idea of blaming a cyber attack that really wasn't there, what went on there?
Well, I mean, it may have registered that alarm in the system because there was so many extra people accessing the system, but surely a moment's thought, a nanosecond's thought would have told the minister that maybe they were genuine, desperate people because of the times that we're living in. And to have a kind of flip my bad response when people are desperate, when they're sitting in queues. I mean, the fact that MyGov went down meant more people went and sat in queues outside dole offices where they were in more harm's way in terms of the health impacts of the virus. So it was inexcusable.
Mark, let's just come back briefly to what we heard from the Minister, Matthias Cormann there, particularly on the next economic package that's coming this week, the hibernation plan and this wage subsidy. I mean, clearly the language is shifting. Clearly they are working on, what did he call it, ways to support businesses through existing channels, the tax and welfare systems, but to keep incomes flowing. What did you take from that?
Well, I took that Matthias Cormann's the right man to have fronting up to an interview if you don't really want to give away too much information that isn't already known. He's certainly good at that. He's kind of a Chris Tavares at the crease, you know, doesn't give up his wicket, but you don't really get any scoring either. That said, I think the government's in a very difficult position and it is reconsidering where it was. It does appear to be, and my sources suggest that it is, as you say, David, moving towards some sort of wage subsidy, and that this will apply to the vast majority of people who lose their jobs, including hopefully those people who've already lost their jobs. So it's a pretty extraordinary turn of direction. I think we should be glad about that, because going back to what we've just been talking about, the welfare system and the way that has been overwhelmed so quickly on the first and second day and so forth, it's true that none of the machinery of government is fit for this kind of sudden purposes. James was making the point. So the government is now looking at ways that are actually going to work. The real test will be how quickly this can be rolled out.
And this is the thing, I mean, James, even what they passed on Monday, that double New Start payment won't flow for nearly another month. Right, so now they're coming up with a new mechanism that will presumably take longer. Worth pointing out, though, the Brits and others haven't got theirs up and running yet either. These things do take a long time to put in place. But, I mean, was it clear to you from listening to the Minister that they are going to find a way to keep not only those employees attached to their businesses that are still struggling along, but all those who've already lost their jobs?
Well, he seemed open to it. But, I mean, let's just I mean, he's talking, the government on one hand is saying we've got to keep the economy going, we can't close it. But on the other hand, we're through the looking glass when we're talking about subsidising the wages of 70 or 80% of people's wages. I mean, this is just, we've never done that before, because I don't think people have really grasped that this isn't a stop like the Great Recession, the GFC. It's not even a stop like the 1982 recession. It's not even a stop like the Great Depression. The Great Depression, there was a 10% drop in GDP over a number of years in the early 1930s. The world economy is looking at something much, much, much bigger than that. Even in the Great Depression, if you walked the streets, life was going on. This is a calamitous stop that we have never, ever seen in capitalism, ever. And it's happening simultaneously all over the world.
So where does that leave us?
Well, I don't know. I mean, we're slowly, the question at the moment, everywhere in the world, is does the government have enough money to refloat this? Can the government essentially subsidise, replace private demand when private demand has collapsed? Okay? And at the end of the day, whatever you call it, whether it's buying bonds or we're basically, the government is going to print money. Now, they have been printing money more or less since the GFC, but they're now going to have to print money on a scale which we could not even imagine. And just remember, a year or so ago, they were trying to, the federal government in the United States was trying to rein back the printing of money. Now the presses are rolling. We've never seen anything like this before. We don't know where this is going to end.
Lenore, just on that point, every week we seem to be talking about just a whole other scale of economic disaster here and need for the government to do more. I mean, wage subsidies this week. We were talking a couple of weeks ago about nationalising certain businesses like Virgin and so on. We're going to get into that territory as well, clearly. Is James right? Do you think the whole world is really yet to understand just how bad this is going to get?
Yes, I think James is right. I think we haven't really grasped the extent to which this is going to turn our economy, our understanding of government, our understanding of how we live on its head. I think the government, I can understand the government's idea of trying to sort of talk about hibernation, putting businesses, into some sort of deep freeze and then thawing them out at the end. But that's assuming that demand bounces back at the end. And if you've got 11, 12, 20% unemployment, and if you've got a whole society that's been through a profoundly traumatising shock, there is absolutely no surety. In fact, it's unlikely that demand will bounce back. So I can understand the hibernation plan. I think it's the right way to go, but it's not going to be an easy thawing at the end of that plan. It's going to be incredibly traumatic, long-standing and difficult.
Yeah, can I just make the point? I think, although it is a moonshot in a sense, that as Lenore just described, the difficulty of the task of sort of thawing out enterprises at the end and hoping that there's enough private demand in the economy to actually do anything, that might be very difficult, but there is no other option. And I don't envy the government. I don't think anyone envies the situation the government is in at the moment. The question is really that I guess we're debating is how realistic is its approach of sort of slowly ratcheting up these restrictions, or whether it should move more decisively and quickly, and whether that might, in some ways, as James was saying at the outset, whether that might in some ways be in the interests of some of these enterprises.
Well, there are so many elements to this, but one, and Labor's really putting the pressure on so many fronts right now. One is tenants. Jason Clare making it clear they don't want anyone to be evicted during this.
Our home is our castle. In the next few months, it's going to be our fortress. More and more Australians are being told to stay at home. But you can't stay at home if you don't have one. You can't stay at home if you've been evicted. And that's why we're saying we need a freeze on evictions.
Yeah, now once you do that, I mean, James, fair enough. No one wants to see people evicted.
But it's a fairly fatuous point at this point. No one's being evicted at this time. And apart from anything else, in the middle of Sydney and Melbourne, you've had the removal of thousands of international students. Demand in the rental market has just gone through the floor.
There will be landlords.
But for whom? Where are they getting these new tenants from, and how are they going to pay? It's a good emotive grab for them. But is there a real imminent crisis of people being thrown out onto the street in like it's sort of Harlem in 1932? No.
What are those people doing who are not earning any money at the moment? We've just been talking about people who immediately lose all of their income, who are living sort of hand to mouth, pay packet to pay packet. Suddenly they don't have an income, they can't pay the rent. It's quite possible that some people will be evicted, and I think it is appropriate to be trying to institute rules. Would
you want to be letting a property right now?
No, I certainly wouldn't want to.
Lenore.
Clearly there's enough of a problem that the government is actually looking at a policy response to it, which Matthias Coleman was talking about, sort of spreading the burden between state governments, maybe lifting land tax, and federal governments, and giving tax breaks, and possibly banks giving mortgage holidays. So clearly they think there's a problem because they're developing a policy to address it.
At the end of the day, the only organisations big enough to carry this are the four big banks and the federal and state governments together, I suppose, in terms of their capacity of their balance sheets. So ultimately, they're the ones who are going to have to, if we're going to this hibernation plan, going to have to carry the cost ultimately of all these things.
I would not include the four big banks on that list. The four big banks are now at the point where the government stands behind them. The four big banks on their own cannot.
But they have to stand.
But
there'll be a lot of smaller lenders who disappear.
I agree, but they're essentially proxies now for the federal government.
Yeah, they're absolutely backed up. But the point is, everything flows up to them essentially through this. Whether we're talking about landlords, whether we're talking about insurance companies, whether we're talking about shopping centres, commercial landlords, and so on. So it's very complicated. We'll see how they go, and this has to be done very quickly. People need guarantees pretty smartly as to whether they should fold their business or not right now. I want to come to the schools debate. We've still got a lot of this debate about whether schools should be shut or not. Victoria, they have shut, and they're now technically in school holidays. Other states are doing different things. There's been a bit of a shift in the Prime Minister's language on schools, I think. A week ago, he was talking about kids should go to school. He talked about his own kids going to school, making a virtue of that. Have a look at his comments this week.
And school won't be as usual going into the future. That's important. But we must have an orderly transition that ensures that workers, and as I said last night, an essential worker is a worker with a job, because I don't want any parent to have to choose between putting food on the table for their kids and for their kids getting an education. That is not a choice I want any parent in this country to have to make.
And then on Friday, after the National Cabinet meeting, this statement issued where the Prime Minister says, while the medical advice remains that it is safe for children to go to school, to assist with the transition underway in our schools to the new mode of operation, here's the point: we ask that only children of workers for whom no suitable care arrangements are available at home to support their learning physically attend school.